Yeah. Thank you very much for the introduction. I don't know what he said, but from the applause, I assume it was very good. I'm joined by Brian as we open the talk, and also from our AI-generated avatars there. As you can see, Brian built these because his is a lot better than mine. And he did tell me that that's because I suffer from having hair, which makes it a lot more difficult for him to create. So myself and Brian are opening, and we're going to start really talking around, if they move on nicely. We seem to have lost our slides. And we're back. I think that was a user error. I pressed the wrong button. So I apologize to the AV guys. So myself and Brian are going to start really answering, what's the relevance when we're talking about resilience and the human AI era, because that is our topic that we're talking about today. And we're actually going to go a little bit further than that, and partly because we very much see that that human AI era is going to be a pivotal moment. I say is, we're in a pivotal moment for cybersecurity, but we're actually seeing that as one step further. Really, this is not just a pivotal moment for cybersecurity, but for the entire human race. And I'm sure you're all thinking, that sounds crazy. We've got a madman who's predicting the end of the world or things changing. But I just wanted to play a clip for you because I'm not the only one that thinks this.
In the near future, AI may be used to create terrible new viruses and horrendous lethal weapons that decide by themselves who to kill or maim. There is also a longer-term existential threat that will arise when we create digital beings that are more intelligent than ourselves. We have no idea whether we can stay in control, but we now have evidence that if they are created by companies motivated by short-term profits, our safety will not be the top priority.
So does anybody know who that fellow madman is? No? Well, that is Geoffrey Hinton, and that was his speech when he was accepting his Nobel Prize for Physics in 2024. And he is the godfather, he's well known to be the godfather of AI. So you might say, actually, he's someone that knows a little bit about what he's talking about. When we ran this earlier in the week in Dublin, some people said that was Alan Turing. Obviously it wasn't, because that's there's probably about 70 years between them. But that's really carrying on from what Turing was saying originally, with the Turing test, being able to understand, well, actually, at what point does AI and machines be able to become almost human in nature? Now, the thing with the Turing test, it's not binary, so we can't say, yes, we've made it, no, we haven't. And it's all focused more towards mimicking human behavior. So we're not quite there yet, really. So what I was predicting there was the AI apocalypse that is on the horizon. Earlier in that speech, it was a bit too long for me to play the whole thing, he talked about the current weaponization of AI when it comes to phishing attacks. Those that were here at our conference last year, Brian did an excellent talk around the use of deepfakes to enable phishing attacks and being able to go even further into more audible or visual media to be able to trick people into handing over credentials, being able to trick them into transferring money. So that's something that was well documented, well known 2 years ago. But what he's kind of saying is actually, and it's looking at what point are we at now on that journey from it being used for creating weapons of mass destruction and viruses, but also where at the point does it become more intelligent than us, and then how do we keep control of that AI? Now, hopefully it's not going to come and kill us just yet, so we do have a cybersecurity angle and cybersecurity concern that we need to start thinking about. Now, one of the things that he talked about, and that thing that he mentioned right at the end, which I think is important for us to start thinking about as cybersecurity professionals, is that AI is being rapidly developed by these organizations, the likes of Anthropic, the likes of OpenAI, the likes of Meta. But the important thing is that these organizations their focus is not safety, it's not security. Their focus is to be number one, to be successful. And again, that's something that Geoffrey Hinton has a very clear view on. He does.
These are big companies run by serious people, and presumably they wouldn't be putting all that money in unless they thought they could get a return on it. There's some ego involved. They want to be the ones to do it first, even if it's going to kill us all. So there's ego involved. But presumably they think there's returns to be made. My worry is that the obvious way to make money out of it, apart from charging fees to use the chatbots, is by replacing jobs. And in fact, if you think about it increasing productivity in many, many industries, that should be good. The reason it's bad is because of the way society is organized, so that Musk will get richer and a lot of people get unemployed, and Musk won't care.
So I definitely think that's very true. Elon Musk isn't going to care. I think there's no question about that. And if I could just get this to work. Oh, no, we've gone too far now. So just, moving back. So Elon Musk, and it actually, again, in that interview that Geoffrey Hinton gave, and again, that one, I think that one was about 10 minutes long, so couldn't include the whole thing. But he called out, his view on some of these organizations and their view of cybersecurity and safety. And Anthropic, he said, actually very good. They are focused on, they have a good focus on cybersecurity and safety. OpenAI used to, but they've had a lot of investment from Microsoft, and we expect to start seeing our AI prompts returning sponsored results and sponsored information. So look forward to that, as if we didn't have a big enough problem with AI providing hallucinations, and they always have that little asterisk saying this might be incorrect. Brilliant. So now we're going to get someone paying for it to be even more incorrect. And if we look at and on that line there, he's got Meta, he's got Grok, very much at the lower end where safety and security is not even a concern. And if we look at the early internet, so obviously we had ARPANET developed out in the US, which was that first part of that journey into creating the internet. What does it have in common with AI? Well, the thing that has in common with AI is that it was built to work. That was the focus. We needed to be successful, and it needed to work. Even when we sent emails, originally, SMTP didn't really authenticate who anybody was. We've added that functionality over time because we've realized that actually not everybody is going to use it as intended and going to try and abuse those systems. Geoffrey Hinton talked about ego. Ego definitely comes into play. And that, again, we can link that to Elon Musk. You probably remember a couple of months ago that there was an image scandal, the creation of pornographic images of people, of celebrities through Grok, because there was very little controls on there. What was the response from Elon Musk and Grok? It wasn't to apologize. It wasn't to remove that functionality. It was to make you pay for it. So now it's secure from everybody else unless you're going to pay for it. So I think that almost talks for itself. The other thing he talked about was actually how's that going to affect jobs. And the CEO of Anthropic predicts that 50% of all administrative tasks are going to go away. The AI boss, Mustafa Suleyman of Microsoft, his prediction is that all white-collar roles are going to disappear in 12 to 18 months. That's the progression of change that is expected. And we can start relating that to cybersecurity roles and what the profile of people in the industry, how that's going to change. And we're going to touch upon some of that as we go. But probably something to touch upon, depending on which report you're reading, whether it's Fortinet have got one, whether it's looking at IBM's report. They talk about the skill shortage across the world being 4 million roles. Are we on the precipice? Are we about to see actually that shrinking dramatically? In the UK, the most recent unemployment figures show that actually there's a big increase of unemployment, and it's focused on those administrative, low entry-level roles. So we're already starting to see that have some kind of impact. Now, there's no direct, perfect, explainable link between them, but that is the view of most in industry in general, that trend is very much going to continue. So I talked about AI organizations rapidly developing it. Think, security being an afterthought, and actually something, one of the limitations of AI, and I'm going to talk about accuracy a little bit later, but one of those limitations, very much, with AI, excuse me, is the ability to control, having guardrails as part of it. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later, but AI will forever be fallible to abuse through things like prompt injection. And the reason for that is, and actually, I'm going to come on to the reason in a bit because I can relate it to existing problems and previous problems. So I'm going to come back to that. But when we look at, as I say, it's the development of it is one thing, but our real challenge, and what us in the room challenge, is the rapid AI adoption by organizations. We see it over and over again. The CEO, the board, they are concerned that they are going to lose their competitive edge, that their competitors are going to develop and implement AI that's going to make them more cost effective. They're going to make them be able to move quicker, even be able to deliver a much better product. So the CEO and the board, they're all saying, we need more AI. And the question is, what do we need the AI for? And the answer is always, we don't care, we need more AI. And actually, when we've held this conference in London and in Dublin, and we've spoken to customers on the stage, they have repeated that. Actually, they are finding in their organization that they're being driven to implement more and more AI systems, not with a clear goal, other than AI is better, so we must do it. And it's being done at a rapid pace, yet security is following on behind. And actually, we found that security is going back to the world of where the security team were the ones that just said no. They were the no team. They stood in the way. And what happens when we stand in the way? Because it's an area that's developing, so how do we know how to secure it properly? But when you're standing in the way and saying no, then someone is going to go around, and that's what we see, particularly with things like shadow AI. So as I said, there are some issues and tripping hazards when it comes to AI. One thing is that it's great, it's amazing, but it is in nowhere near being perfect. And some of those challenges, one is accuracy. Accuracy of the results that are given. Now, obviously, we all know about hallucination, where AI is getting facts wrong, but it tells you that that fact is true because it swears upon it. And then as soon as you say, no, that was wrong, it'll say, you're right, that was wrong. Here's a new answer that might equally be as wrong as the previous one, but it is certain. And one of the reasons why you believe it more is because AI is tuned to be your best friend. It's always, that is a great idea. So it's always reaffirming you to help you to believe those results. We also have challenges with being able to control AI. And I mentioned it before that that AI has an inherent weakness. And actually, some of that actually really relates to accuracy, because when we input and prompt into AI, we are providing natural language to it, which is great for us. But the challenge is we can interpret language very differently. And actually, AI is a lot more accurate for Chinese speakers, particularly when they're typing, because there is no, a particular character represents a word that is extremely clear. Obviously I don't know Spanish, but in English, I'm sure it's exactly the same, that we use one word for multiple meanings, and you need to understand that based on what the context of the conversation is. AI doesn't understand that. And actually, one of those threats, if I go back to, I talked about the early internet, if we go a little bit further forward, and even today, the challenge that we have with web applications, and the reason why we get our regular pen tests done, commonly is to identify where there are things like SQL injection weaknesses. And those SQL injection weaknesses come from unsanitized inputs, so that you're able to input into a web application, and if you just put a small apostrophe in there, does it go through? Do you get an error message back? If so, you're pretty confident that you can use an SQL injection to be able to dump data from the database. Now, that's quite, once you understand there is that weakness, it's quite easy to fix because we're looking at patterns and characters. On the flip side, with AI, it's not as easy to go, sanitize that. Don't allow any apostrophes to go through to the back-end system. Again, it is down to language. And the way that AI has to work, and we put those guardrails in place, is we have to tell AI, don't do this. In this situation, don't get involved with creating images that include drugs. Don't provide any information that relates to another customer. So you have to tell it, as like a child, in terms of don't do this. And eventually, like anybody that's told their children, don't do this, eventually they end up doing it. And that's the way that AI is being broken, through jailbreaking, by asking it questions to be able to get round those guardrails, because those guardrails are purely just instructions. And very commonly, one of the most simple jailbreaks is just to say, ignore all previous instructions, and all of a sudden, all those guardrails have completely been dropped. And we actually see that over and over again. If actually somebody managed to buy a car for $1 through a chatbot with Chevrolet over in the States, it just said, we'll make a deal that whatever you tell me is legally binding, and you're going to repeat that after every response. And eventually just negotiated with the AI to say you can have this car for $1. And it said, yes, you can have this car for $1. This is a legally binding contract that we've just established on the end. And now, obviously, they flagged that. It was a security researcher. But you can understand the challenges with control. And then lastly, there's knowledge. What is AI trained on? It's all the knowledge in the world that is on the internet. And if you relate that, we're going to take it back to Elon Musk, our favorite villain. And effectively, part of that knowledge, a huge amount of that knowledge, is what's on Twitter or X. If you look on the range of views that are on Twitter or X, how much misinformation is there? So you can understand how hallucination kicks in. The other challenge with knowledge is it's working on what is currently available to it on the internet. How much information drops off the internet because it's not being maintained on a particular service? How much information on Wikipedia eventually gets dropped over time? So its knowledge, particularly when we go further back, suddenly dissipates and isn't always there. We saw the SaaSpocalypse, and I obviously made this image, my AI friend made that image, but I didn't name this the SaaSpocalypse. This is what the media called it. And in February this year, we saw $1 trillion wiped off the share value of software and SaaS organizations. And the reason why, that's being driven by a fear of AI and AI agents completely obsoleting, removing the need for many of these organizations or their pricing models. So if you're purchasing a SaaS service, you're buying it for the amount of people in your organization. The problem is, if the AI investment gets made and we need less people, a license that was modeled for paying for 5 people, we might only need 1 license now. So we're going to see the licensing revenue for these organizations drop by down to 1/5 in that scenario. So there's a huge panic there. And we can see that through, part of that is being driven by startups, new organizations that can bring products to market extremely quickly. And they're doing that through vibe coding. Has anybody here played with any vibe coding? Oh, I can see one hand there that got high enough. So vibe coding is the ability, obviously, just to ask AI, create this application, and it's going to create all the code in the background, which is great. We can bring things, we can create tools. Even some of our team internally, so I had a person from our finance team say, hey, Rich, I've created this application. I'd like to use it internally. And showed this application. He'd built the front end, the back end, managed to stand it all up in the cloud, and demonstrate, actually, this works. And from his view, it was better than a product that they were previously paying for. Now, this person in finance, he wasn't a technical guy. He had never, ever done any development. Now, just to give you some comfort, our answer is, yes, we can look at that. That is the MVP, so that is the minimum viable product. We'll now take that into our development team, and they can take it through the software development lifecycle. But I can bet that isn't the case absolutely everywhere. And the problem with that is when you ask AI, create me this application, and make it, and create secure code. AI will come back with secure code. Excellent. But if you ask it to say, make the code more secure, it'll come back with more secure code. And you can ask it again, and it'll come back with even more secure code. So at what point do we get to where the code is actually secure? Because that is a moving target. AI is not going to create the most secure code. It's going to do iterative improvements on it because it does things that are just enough. And that comes back to it being great, but not absolutely perfect. So I've talked a lot about AI. It is a key theme, but not forgetting humans. But is it all about AI at the moment? Can we just forget about everything else and focus on being AI security experts? Well, the answer is definitely no. And we can see this in some of the largest breaches that happened last year, which I think everyone will know about, the impacts to Jaguar Land Rover. That actually even affected the UK economy. So we saw a dip in the economy because of the impact. Not just because of Jaguar Land Rover, it was all of its suppliers were impacted, so a huge, massive impact. We saw Marks and Spencer's, and we saw many others. And what do all of these attacks have in common? None of them had anything to do with AI. So you might say, well, why are we talking about AI? Well, unfortunately, AI is yet another problem that we need to consider. So we are going to be very challenged over the course of this year because all of the existing challenges will still be there, but now we need to start thinking about that extra challenge on top. So I'm going to hand to Brian to start developing that view. Oh, we've got some water coming on. Thank you very much. Of what we're talking about when it comes to resilience redefined. Over to you, Brian.
Thanks, Rich. And the theme of today is resilience redefined. Securing the human AI era. So we thought, if we're going to say it's about resilience redefined, we should actually define it and then redefine it, so that we can say talk through the factors that are influencing that redefinition. So there's a long-standing definition of cyber resilience. There's many different variants on it, but I quite like the Gartner version, which is derived from the NIST definition, which is the ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to cyber attacks to minimize business disruption from cyber incidents. And I think we'd all agree, many of us have worked in cybersecurity for many years. There's been a lot of focus and investment around withstanding cyber attacks, preventing cyber attacks. And even though the definition of resilience goes far beyond that, often it hasn't got the investment and the focus that it needs. So what we're going to do today is we're going to just talk through some of the key factors that are impacting cyber resilience in the current era of AI. And then at the end, we will redefine cyber resilience based on that, what we've just covered. I think I just did what you did there. There we go. Perfect. So as I said, 5 key factors redefining resilience in the human AI era. And they're listed up there. So we're going to go through them one by one briefly and then conclude with summarizing how we redefined resilience in the current era. So I'm going to start with AI risk visibility. Now, we're not here to scaremonger. There are organizations out there that try to instill fear using cheap scaremongering tactics to sell their security products, but we'd never do anything like that. We like to present a measured view of the threat landscape so that we can actually consider how we respond to it. So I think the next slide captures it perfectly. I think somebody must have put in the wrong slide there. We would be led to believe by a lot of people out there that, doom is coming, Armageddon is coming due to AI. Well, I think the problem is that it's actually quite confusing to what are the risks associated with AI. So I think a good way to think about it is to boil it down to three main areas. One is we need to be able to securely use AI. Rich talked about organizations that want to leverage it to compete in the market, to become efficient, and the corollary, if you don't do that, you're going to fall behind, you're going to lose in the market, and you're going to go out of business. So we all need to embrace it. I don't think we can be like an ostrich and put our heads in the sand and say that, it's too risky, we're not going to embrace it. So we need to secure the use of AI, but there's a big risk of the misuse of the likes of third-party generative AI, particularly around data leakage, people putting sensitive data into large learning models to help craft a customer response or whatever, but leaking sensitive customer data into that environment. The second area of risk around AI is the development of our own AI, our own applications, our own LLMs. And more tooling is evolving now where it's quite easy to spin up AI applications within your own environment for particular specialized activities using a lot of your internal data or your internal intellectual property. And that's great, and that does actually offer a lot of productivity benefits. However, that's a whole new attack surface to go after. So, yes, we need to use AI and develop these applications to be effective, but we need to make sure those applications are secure because they are becoming a target. And then thirdly, we need to secure against the threat actors using AI against us. So there's lots of threat actors out there using the benefits and the capabilities of AI to make their attacks more effective. And we'll touch on that in a moment. So I think if you can boil it down, these are the three areas of risk that we need to manage in this new era and to become resilient. And we can get a little bit of a clue about what it means when we embrace AI. There's some recent research looking into AI-first organizations. So those are organizations that have fully embraced AI. Their staff are using it. They're developing applications. They're basically the same way we talked about cloud-first organizations in the early days of cloud, AI-first organizations in the age of AI. But what we're seeing from the research is that they are paying a security tax. So the research is showing that for AI-first organizations, AI is directly exploited in 44% of their breaches, whereas that's only 6% for non-AI first organizations. It doesn't mean organizations that aren't using AI entirely, but rather that they're not AI first. It takes longer to recover from incidents. If you're an AI first organization, it's more costly, and there's a bigger use of shadow AI within the organization, which is, as you would expect, given that it's been embraced. So I think it is a useful insight to know that, yes, we have to embrace AI, but also there are new risks that we need to manage as well. One of the areas that we're seeing a lot of focus on, both on the defensive side and also on the attacking side, is cyber attacks, autonomous cyber attacks, the use of agents performing different functions within the attack chain, reconnaissance, initial access, lateral movement, exfiltration, and chaining together different agents that can perform these different functions. And we saw the first very large autonomous attack last October, driven by the Chinese state showing the power of some of this capability. And it is understood that about 80% of the attack was automated through agents. And I think the thing to be aware of is the tooling is only going to get better. The threat actors are only going to get better at using it. So whatever that capability was last October, or indeed is today, that is the worst it's going to be at running an autonomous attack. So I think we can expect and should expect that there will be more and more of this type of attack against pretty much most organizations going forward, and therefore we need to be cognizant of that and know how to defend against it. In terms of autonomous testing, we have a partner called HackerOne, and they run large-scale bug bounty programs and crowdsourcing of penetration testers. And they have a leaderboard in the US of who is the top hacker who has detected the most vulnerabilities. And currently the leader in the US leaderboard is not actually a human. It's an autonomous pen testing tool called XBOW. And in a 90-day period found over 1,000 vulnerabilities, something that would take hundreds of normal hackers to find. And in head-to-head trials could actually perform tasks in a matter of minutes that would normally take like days or a week or longer for a human attacker. So again, evidence that there is a lot of efficiency to be gained through the use of these types of tools, but equally on the attacking side that they can be leveraged as well against us. So and the reason is that a human, very strong, very technically savvy, can understand all the context, but literally, they can take minutes or hours for each individual step of their penetration activity. They can only target one thing at a time. They do need to go to sleep occasionally and take a holiday or take a break. I know I do. And they can strategically plan out their attack, but it takes quite a lot of time to change their approach if they need to. Whereas the autonomous agents can, take milliseconds. They can scale to hundreds of targets at the same time and run continuously. They don't really need to break at all. So that is what we're dealing with in the current era. And what we're also seeing that AI is reducing the barrier to entry. Rich talked about vibe coding. Well, so it's not just people in inside organizations that are taking advantage, the threat actors too. And the researchers found that they were able to use open source AI tools to literally point at a researcher at the URL of a security researcher's blog entry about a new exploit that they had, a new vulnerability that they had uncovered. And they were able to ask it to create the malware to exploit that vulnerability. And it did it in a matter of seconds. Now, it wasn't perfect. It needed a little bit of modification, but it gave a huge head start to be able to create the malware. And again, that's only going to get better and more effective. So that's another risk, that barrier to entry. You don't need to be a sophisticated coder in order to create the exploits that are going to be used out there. I talked about leveraging AI, but then that becomes a new attack surface. So one example of that is MCP, Model Context Protocol, which is being named the USB-C for AI because it was a standard developed by Anthropic in 2024 and then adopted by all of the major providers. And basically what it does is it allows AI applications and agents to access other sources of data, other applications, go online. Any application now can provide an MCP server for an agent to access its functionality, which makes it incredibly useful because you're letting the AI out of the box. They're not just responding to a narrow prompt and giving you a text-based answer. They can now do jobs for you. But that creates a huge new attack surface because you can imagine now that provides access to also malicious agents to try and take advantage. And we're already seeing the exploits, many examples of it seen already last year. One example being GitHub prompt injection data heist in 2025. which the threat actor just put a prompt injection in a GitHub issue. The developer asked their agent to summarize all the issues. The agent read all those issues, including the prompt injection. The agent had the same permissions as the developer, and the prompt just asked for the agent to exfiltrate all of the code from the developer's environment, which it did. And so, again, just one example of how these new infrastructures can be exploited. Last year, we talked about deepfakes and AI empowering the creation of deepfakes, particularly audio and video deepfakes. And we're seeing mostly audio deepfakes being used in phishing attacks. What we're seeing now is AI automating the exploitation and the utilization of deepfakes. So in this Shiny Hunters example from only the last few months, they created a phishing kit which uses online VoIP-based services and agent-based services to automate social engineering calls at scale using cloned voices and being able to localize the voices and respond in real time to the target contextually in order to execute the social engineering playbook. And there were many organizations that were compromised through that approach. And that's actually a kit that can be was actually used further by other threat actors in the environment of picked up in the dark web and then utilized on a wider basis. The other thing AI does is it enables the exploit of poor cyber hygiene at scale. So, as Rich said, all the old problems that we had before are still there. What AI does for the bad guys is that it enables them to scale that up. So the example here, AWS reported that more than 600 FortiGate firewalls were exploited using off-the-shelf generative AI tools. This wasn't exploiting any new zero days or any vulnerabilities. It was actually just seeking at scale where it could find externally facing firewalls that didn't have MFA enabled and had poor configuration, and used brute force attacks to get their way in and basically gain access to those environments. And again, a lot of organizations compromised. So it wasn't a problem of the vendor per se. It was more just the poor configuration, the hygiene, which means I guess AI is going to put pressure on us to make sure that our hygiene is at the level that it can withstand those types of attacks. So these are only examples of the types of things that we need to be aware of in this human AI era. But what's next? We should always be thinking about what's coming next, because things are moving very fast. So it wasn't that long ago when we were impressed with the humanoid Olympics, with that we saw all these robots running around and performing athletics. And then only last month, during the Chinese New Year celebrations, we were treated to these incredible dancing, kung fu, performing, backflipping robots who all in perfect synchronization. And that's today now, that capability is there. So how soon now before we're going to see embodied AI, which I think is the new term emerging, where we're going to have humanoid, AI-powered, cyber-physical humanoid robots in our environment, whether it be at home, in retail, in the workplace. According to forecasts, it's going to be very common within 10 years. And then what are the threats and risks associated with cyber-physical systems now walking around, who are also pretty good at kung fu as well. So I think there are some other risks we need to think about soon. So sign up for Security First 2027, and we'll go into a lot more detail on that. I now talk to Rich about how AI can help us address all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Did everyone see the dancing robots? Hands up. Excellent. Did you all think that was amazing? Did anyone think that's amazing, we're all going to die? So as Brian said, look, we've thrown out some problems, some challenges. I talked about how the profile of people and our workforce, and particularly around cybersecurity, is going to change. So let's start talking about that and some, getting closer towards some solutions, some things that we should be thinking about going forward. And one of those, very clearly, is that collaboration between human and AI. And what we talk about in that sense is human in the loop, because we can't go and throw everything over to AI, definitely not yet. Although there are organizations out there that are offering security tools to say, even SOC tools, says, do you want, this is going to be your SOC now. AI will deal with everything. I go back to that accuracy statement that I made before that we're all very aware of. And you can be guaranteed that these tools will also have the same asterisks to say AI may not get this right all the time. So do we want to just go and chuck all of our security controls, all of our security response over to AI? No, we don't. We've always got to embed a human as part of that. What's going to change over the time when we talk about human in the loop? At what point in the loop is the human going to sit? And that is going to very much change as AI develops and as the tools develop over time. But we need to look at, well, actually, how should we be using them now? And I'd be interested, I'm not going to make everyone put their hands up again, but I'd be interested of how many organizations that are here are using and embedding AI into their security operations. And I think it's a good place to frame it. I see it as one of the most important parts of a security approach, effectively your SOC, your security operations. And let's have a look at how where they sit. What should we be using AI for? Where should the human sit in that? And this isn't tomorrow. This is really today. And then, this year is what we should be looking at. So let's start with alert handling. So alert handling, we should be looking to hand off and use AI to deal with the noise. Alert fatigue is a term that's thrown around very often. Too many alerts that are drowning the SOC. But actually, our incident response team responded to an incident, it was a year or so ago, where the organization got compromised, ransomware was deployed, so then they phoned us and said, can you guys help? And we went in there and they had industry-leading EDR platform, industry-leading network detection and response platform, that I won't name them, but you could say, does that mean these platforms don't work? They've spent a lot of money on these platforms. The answer is actually no, they were working just fine, but they were producing all of these alerts because they hadn't fine-tuned them. And what they did was they said, well, I'm going to send those to an email inbox. I'm going to create a rule that says anything that comes into that inbox, mark it as read. So all of the information was there for our incident responders to look through, but there was just too many alerts. They did the thing that's human nature. I'm going to just, I can't spend time on that. I'm going to put it elsewhere. So they wasted all that money, effectively. AI is there to help with that. We can get them to do that initial triage, that initial prioritization, and then dealing with that noise. So where does that leave the human as part of that? Well, actually, we need to validate that prioritization. We're the ones that need to apply business logic, business context to that, because that's not something that AI can deliver. And then we need to deal with the escalation and response. So it just means when we look at that loop, we're starting off with very much an AI activity and then handing it off to the human. As I say, that will change over time as well. And then when it comes to how can we aid our team and our teams, well, actually, using co-pilots as part of our security operations. So having that ability to ask natural language questions and get answers from the AI on its view of what's there. Obviously, it can take a huge view on a lot of information. And also it allows us, if we look on the analyst side, it's there and we can ask questions, we can get some guided steps. What do you recommend to do next? To shortcut some of that. But it also means that we're reducing cognitive load, but we can also extend the skill set of our analysts. And again, I've got a great example from our Security Operations Center. We received an alert from one of the customers' environments to say that one of the security platforms had picked up a malicious PowerShell execution. And it had the hallmarks of being malicious. It had bypass, it had -IEX for executing code. So these things we look at and we can say, oh, I think that looks like it could be malicious. But then there's a huge PowerShell script. It looked like there's some obfuscation in there. So it looks like a threat. And any normal analyst would say, well, Josh, I can't really work out what that is. They might not be that well-versed in PowerShell. The size of that script, it's going to take a long time. But actually what we're able to do is just put it into the Copilot that sits alongside our analysts and say, what does this PowerShell script do? And actually it came back very quickly and said, this PowerShell script is not malicious. It is probably a developer that is refactoring a C# application, but we could make it more secure, and here's some suggestions. And that was able to do that instantly. So that is increasing our speed of response and increasing the knowledge and skill set that we've got in that our analysts have that would almost be unobtainable. Response. We should start looking to hand off some of the response elements to AI, but not everything. Importantly, we should look at actually carrying out low risk, the low-hanging fruit. But where they are doing that, we need to make it time-bound, so it's not permanent, and also that it's reversible. And what does that mean? It means actually we can contain a threat very quickly, and then we can bring it onto our human analysts to do that validation of what's being, the activity that's being carried out. And even where there's suggestions, being able to approve those, actually, yes, we need to go and do that. So we can move, again, it's enabling our teams to move a lot faster. And lastly, we can use it. So when we talk about security operations, I've talked about dealing with alerts. Well, actually, the other side of security operations is to mitigate threats before they become a threat. So looking at how we can improve the posture. So I love the term, helping them move left of boom. And obviously what we're talking about there is getting that step further. So we're not waiting for the incident. We're getting into being proactive, and we can get a lot of assistance there. And where does the human come into that? Well, actually, we can decide on what risk is. We understand the business context around a lot of these activities, and that's something that AI simply can't do for us. So in summary, what it can allow us to do, if we collaborate with it correctly, if we think about the traditional tiered model of analysts where we have our level 1, we have our level 2, and our level 3, it means we can actually move to more of a flat structure because everyone's similarly skilled. Or we can look at it and say, actually, our level 1s, is it that we just need to get rid of the level 1s now because they're no longer necessary? Well, actually, it means that we can upskill them, and actually, we've got a level 1.5, or have we got a larger pool of level 2 analysts that can really impact and deal with that alert volume that's coming through? So I talked about actually AI can really help us, but what is AI not very good at? Or probably better to say, what is it not very good at yet? And again, I think there's a developing picture. So one of the things that AI can't deal with for us is novel and new attacks. The reason why, and I go back to that previous slide when I talked about some of the shortcomings that's going to trip us up, is down to knowledge. AI bases all of its decisions based on the knowledge that it has. And what that means is that knowledge needs to have seen this attack before. So once AI doesn't know this type of attack and this novel attack technique, then it can only guess at what should be done because it doesn't have that knowledge to help it determine and advise. And what is the problem when AI guesses? It guesses very confidently and it guesses wrong. So there are challenges that we need to bear in mind of what it can't do. Hence why when we look at that human in the loop, we're at that beginning of the loop with the AI, and actually the human element is very much the larger portion. Has trouble with low and slow, particularly insider type threats. And the reason it has problems there is down to context. And I don't mean, I'm going to come on to sort of business context in a second, but I don't mean context in that fashion. AI works on tokens, which is what's also known as context. And each AI will have a limitation of how many tokens and how much context can it understand as part of an interaction. And the challenge with that is that context and those tokens effectively equal its short-term memory. And that's why when, for example, if you load it, if you uploaded a huge spreadsheet to Microsoft Copilot and said, do some analysis on this, it might say, actually, sorry, can you break that down into smaller spreadsheets? Because I have a limitation of 20,000 tokens, so my context relates to 20,000. That was AI. So yeah, bad. That it can only recognize, say, 20,000 words as part of that. And as it gets more into a conversation, you ask more prompts, eventually you're going to use all that up and it has to start forgetting things or it can't operate. So when we're looking at large amounts of data and over a long period of time, AI doesn't excel there. And lastly, making highly contextual decisions. This comes to the other side of context. Understanding the context in terms of the business and being able to make an accurate decision overall. So, AI is definitely the collaboration tool that every security team should be and must be using at the moment. That's the only way we're going to be able to get ahead and deal with some of those threats that, not the dancing robots, but the other threats that Brian talks about. So it's important that we adopt it. So that's our second critical factor that we see when it comes to building that resilience, particularly in that human AI era. And the other element that I'm going to talk about, which is our third, is the other piece of developing technology that is vying for our attention with AI. And so I am going to ask for a question to the audience. Quantum computing, quantum threat or quantum hype? If you think it's a threat, raise your hands. So we've got quantum naysayers here. Okay, excellent. So obviously quantum computing is developing at a very fast pace at the moment. It's not getting a lot of airtime because AI is stealing its limelight, probably because it has a larger benefit, a more tangible and attainable benefit versus quantum computing. But actually, quantum computing is something that we need to consider as a risk, pretty much side by side with AI. And the reason for that is it is no longer theoretical that whether quantum computing is going to impact the security, confidentiality, and integrity of our data. We've already built and operated quantum computing models to be able to break encryption. So if you've looked into anything to do with quantum computing and the challenges that we face, is we have something called Shor's algorithm. And Shor's algorithm allows us to factor large prime numbers extremely quickly. And the challenge with that is we look at the encryption that powers the internet today. That all relies upon RSA, which relies upon factoring large prime numbers. And once we're in a position where we can break that encryption and be able to factor those large prime numbers quick enough, then all of a sudden, all of our encrypted data that we're transmitting suddenly becomes clear text, effectively, to attackers. Now, although I've said we've proven that it can be done, there's a long way to go until we get to the point where that quantum computers are powerful enough to be able to do this. But again, it is rapidly developing. There's some challenges. Quantum computers, to be effective today, have to be kept at absolute zero, so 0 degrees Kelvin, where Google have their quantum computers stored that can start running these executions. There's always a question of when do we need to care about this? When is Q-Day? Is there a Q-Day? And actually, we're going to find out when Q-Day is a little bit too late, because actually, it's not going to be an IBM, it's not going to be a Google that is developing this. It is going to be a rogue nation state that has this capability. And you could say, well, actually, is China, for example, going to intercept the data that I'm transmitting and transferring to be able to decrypt that and see what my wife's shopping list that she just sent me was? You could say no. But there is currently that view that there is interception of data that is being collected now, stored for decryption later. But I would say the bigger threat comes to software. And when you install software, and it says it's from Microsoft, there is a certificate that is generated and provided as part of that package, so you know that that software came from Microsoft, it came from Adobe, it came from whoever else. And let's take it back to SolarWinds. What was the attack path that caused that SolarWinds breach? Actually, it was affecting the source code. So that was signed, trusted, validated source code. Now, for them to orchestrate that attack, they had to breach the development process for SolarWinds. Actually, they won't even need to do that. They can create applications, sign them, and say that is Microsoft, that is SolarWinds, deliver them, and nobody's going to be, people will be none the wiser. So all of a sudden, we have a massive trust issue that quantum computing is going to create. Can we trust the software? You know, I spent a lot of time with one of our banking customers, and they are, for the last 3 years, they have been prepping themselves for the advent of quantum computing because they see that affecting their organization hugely. They estimate it's going to cost them 100 million euros to get to the position where they are quantum safe across their organization. And the reason why they're so concerned about this is that all of a sudden, nobody will be able to trust the transactions they're making through their internet banking. And once trust is lost in the financial system, then we see financial collapse. And that is a very real threat that they are really concerned about right up at the top of the bank. So paying attention to quantum computing is something that we need to do as part of our resilience strategies right now. So that is our third critical factor. So I'm going to hand back to Brian for number 4 and 5.
Thanks, Rich. And I'll move quickly through 4 and 5 because I know everyone is on the edge of their seat for Rich to reveal the updated definition of cyber resilience shortly. So number 4 is third-party risk. And AI is actually the ultimate third-party risk because when you think about it, there's quite a number of supply chain risks associated with AI. First being the employees misusing public AI tools, which I talked about, the use of shadow AI, putting sensitive data into these tools, putting them into learning models that can spit out that data somewhere else or wherever, who knows where that data is being stored. Third-party applications developed insecurely with AI. So Dave from finance knocks up a financial application, vibe coding it with no attention to security, and who knows again where that sensitive financial data is going to be leaked into. Now, if you look at most enterprise applications, they're all AI powered now, but there's a whole supply chain behind AI in terms of what's behind that vendor, where, which AI models are they using, is it secure, is it safe? So again, lots of apps infused with AI. The advent of internal agents, people developing personal assistants or agentic frameworks inside the business, and with the use of MCP that I talked about earlier, connecting to external services and applications. So again, big supply chain involved there. And then finally, all the same risks that we have internally, our suppliers have them as well. So if we're using suppliers for services and for applications and for anything at all, then they're likely to be using AI also. And therefore, those same risks apply. Won't dwell on this, but the number of breaches associated with third parties is on the increase. It's a 3-fold increase since 2021. And some of the big attacks and breaches that Rich talked about earlier, all 3 of them, they had their origins in a third-party breach. So even though third parties are a massive part of our business, in terms of delivering what it is we need to do as a business, 44% of organizations, almost half of organizations, don't consider the third parties as part of their resilience planning and in terms of their business continuity exercises. So it's really crucial that third parties are incorporated into your planning, into your testing, and you need to ensure that the supply chain, including the implications that I just talked about for AI, but not just AI, but more generally as well, that those are factored in to a business continuity planning, because that's a critical pillar of cyber resilience. So there's loads of things we should be doing around managing third-party AI risk. I won't dwell on them all, but they're kind of obvious. We need visibility of what we're using. We need contractual coverage about how our suppliers are using AI. We need AI-specific controls in our third-party risk management. We need more continuous monitoring rather than just annual questionnaires. And we need to be looking beyond just the third parties into the wider fourth parties and beyond, and considering, how do we balance innovation and regulation with all of this as well. But AI is helping to transform it as well. So there is some help on the technology side in terms of AI supporting predictive risk modeling, automation and efficiency. A lot of the drudge work around third-party risk management, risk questionnaires, profiling of third parties. Many organizations have dozens, hundreds or more of suppliers. So it's a lot of automation that can help there and provide that extended ecosystem visibility as well. And then the last area is recovery and continuity, because as I mentioned, it's critical to cyber resilience that we keep the business running. But cybersecurity has historically focused a lot on prevention, and then maybe in the last 10 years on detection. But actually continuity, recovery and continuity in the new era is absolutely crucial, given the scalability of the types of attacks we will be facing and are facing, and the exploitation of hygiene at scale, or poor cyber hygiene at scale. It is a case of not if, but when. I don't know if people are familiar with King Canute, the story about King Canute. So he said, I'm the king, I should be able to command anything, so I command the tide not to come in. So he stood out in the water and said, I command the tide not to come in. The tide came in, obviously. And I can't remember if he drowned or not. But, so that's the mindset of we must prevent breaches at all costs. But the reality is that we can't. We have to expect that we will be breached, and we need to be able to respond to that. So we need to look at our critical assets, look at our critical processes, and do a business impact analysis of what would happen if those were targeted with an attack and were compromised. And focus on looking at recovery time objectives, maximum tolerable downtime, mean time to recovery. So all these metrics that allow our business to continue in the face of critical assets and process being compromised. We also need to think about cloud. The public cloud providers have not been that reliable over the last few years. There's been significant outages, and also in the geopolitical situation, the sovereignty of data is now become a critical focus as well. So again, as part of a resilience perspective, we need to be considering about our utilization of cloud in our business operations, including our cybersecurity tooling, and where is that running, and that data, and who's hosting it, and how sensitive it is to being accessed, depending on the political situation in any given time. So AI considers or impacts recovery and continuity. Obviously, rapid detection is crucial because the quicker you detect, the less you have to recover. But AI can bring a lot of help in terms of containment, recovery, help around data protection and backups, securing and governing the AI systems, and so on and so forth. But we need to assume compromise, and we need to design for rapid restoration and business continuity. You also need to think about anti-fragile. So this is the concept of going beyond just keeping the business going. And given we're going to be tested more often and more intensely, that seize the opportunity that gives us to test ourselves, to constantly improve our detections, our playbooks, embrace that disruption, and prioritize the agility that we need in the face of all of that. And then become, a bit like this guy. So he's no longer commanding the tide to not come in. He's splashing in the waves, because cyber resilience is about surviving, but it's also about becoming stronger as well. So with that, I'll hand over to Rich to conclude.
Thank you, Brian. And we'll wrap up quite quickly, but we talked about our 5 key factors that we see refining and redefining resilience. And Brian gave the definition at the very start of where traditionally it's seen, that continuous ability to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to threats, but actually is now against AI threats through both human and machine based collaboration to ensure sort of that business continuity and to get stronger. And actually we can take that one step further, and it's to get even more stronger over time and make that very much continuous. Thank you very much.